What does that mean to you when you think about reinventing yourself as a creator? When you think about having to start again, having to give up what you've been doing for 5 years, for 10 years, because it's not working the way you think it should work. You think it's broken. You think people don't like what you're doing. And these are just your own assumptions. But really, there's something else going on deep down. Reinvention, when I say that, what happens? What do you think about? For me, when I first started thinking about reinventing myself, it was like, oh my God, I got to start again. I got to start from scratch. I got to start from the bottom. I got to work my way up. And that mindset of having to think like that almost drains the life out of you. You think, you know, I haven't got the time. I haven't got the energy at my age. These things start to come up, these things that block you from taking actions that you need to take, that's going to take your life, your career to a different level. And there's ambiguity in there as well because it's not clear what that new level is. There's no clarity in the steps that you're taking. And so what do we do? What did I do? I kind of drifted. I didn't take decisive action and I held on to the old version a bit too long. And I know there's creators out there. I've been speaking to you. We've been on some courses together. I've been coaching, lecturing, talking to you. And for you, reinvention seems like something so far away that other creatives do that you've ended up putting it to the side and thinking this isn't something that you can do. This is something you absolutely must do. This is a non-negotiable at this point. It's non-negotiable. Why? Everything's moving too fast. We keep hearing it. Everything's moving too fast. Everything's moving too fast. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to start. I don't know how to take this to the next level. I don't know what the next level is. I don't know how to use these tools. Change is happening too fast. Change isn't going to slow down. Change is just going to keep on accelerating. We're seeing the disruption of the planet, and this isn't news. What should be the wake up call to all of us is that disruption is an opportunity. When you think about disruption as an opportunity, it changes the game. It changes how you see yourself being disrupted. Right? It changes what you believe disruption is for. As a creator, we are always disrupting. We are always destroying things. We are always recreating things. Just think about the simple process of starting, a new track, for instance, or writing a song. Think how many times you're writing that song out and it might not work. It might not go the way. What do? You rip it up, you start again, you take the best bits and you start building from there. Same thing making a track. You start a track, you have some ideas, some of it works, some of it doesn't. You take the best bits and you start again. It's a process of tearing it down, building it back up, tearing it down, building it back up. That needs to be figured out for you as a creative on a much larger scale. What identity are you holding on to that holds you back? It's your identity that you hold on to. It's what you say you are that keeps you stuck in the old version of yourself. Have you said this to yourself? This is all I can do. For me, when before I left, Full Cycle Records, before I left Jungle Music, before I left being, a DJ, the thing that I said that kept me in that business longer was I'm only a DJ. I can only do X. What's your version of that? Because that's quite a dangerous statement to make. I am only a DJ. I am only an X. Why? Because it limits you. And it limited me for a while. I couldn't see past how I could make a living. And if you can't see past how you're going to make a living, and you're a creator, and especially today, we're going to focus on today and the world in 2026, how everything's changing so fast. And so, if you are saying that you are X and you are stuck in this period and you are holding on to this period and thinking that the past is going to be the thing that you can fall back onto that's going to help you build your future, you're going to be in trouble, right? Because the past doesn't dictate the future. You may have heard this before. The past, we can learn lots from the past, but the future isn't going to be like the past. And this is what we try and do. We try and look for clues and security from things that have happened to help us try and navigate the unknown, right? And so, of course, I did that. As a creator, I looked at my career. I said, yeah, I did this, I did that. I looked at, I looked at what I was doing. I didn't break down how I did it or why I did it. And we'll get to that maybe on another session. But what I did was a result of the actions that I took. And those actions were buried in riding a wave. Early 90s, jungle music, early technology, sampling, mixing desks, cutting dub plates, going to raves, playing dub plates. This is before the internet. So there was a wave and we caught it. And most people, they forget that if you can create unusual outsized returns in winter, you'll be able to succeed in any season. But the mistake majority of us make is thinking because it was summer, the season was good. The the money was flowing, the investments were flowing, the opportunities were plenty. They mistook that as I can be successful anytime. Just making sense. When you think about it, when the times are good, when lots of money is flowing, when lots of opportunities are flowing, people mistaken that for being a serial entrepreneur or a creative. You're riding a wave. And that's what I see a lot of people doing. They're riding a wave. And it feels like, yeah, I'm the one that's making it happen. But as soon as that wave crashes against the shore and you have to figure out how you did it and you didn't study, you didn't understand what you did to get that success, and you try and recreate that success in your next endeavor and it falls down, you start to question whether it was you or whether it was the environment. And if you don't have the toolkit, you won't be able to distinguish between the two. And so the identity is important because in those stages of change, the identity needs to be upgraded. And we don't necessarily have the skills to accomplish this because where are we learning this stuff? I started DIY. I started doing warehouse parties. I started doing house parties, clubs. Then we started doing DJing, being booked around the country, producing. Every step of the way, it was trial and error. Every step of the way, it was stumble as you learn. Every step of the way, it was making mistakes, learning the hard way, until I had to take 7 years out to study and figure out how did we create that level of success and how do people create that level of success? What's the difference that makes the difference? What what type of person needs to show up? And so we all have been trained through school to think a certain way. One size fits all. One thinking style is the only thinking style. And if that doesn't work, there's something wrong with you. And so what do? We go and we try and start a business. We start a creative endeavor. We do what the thing they tell us to do. It doesn't work. And then what do? We say, I'm a failure. That's the best we can do. We haven't figured out that it's not I'm a failure. It's I failed at doing something because this is the best I can do with what I know. That's the limit of that identity. That's the limit of that vehicle, that person, the toolkit that you have. You, if you've never started a business, how do you know how to do it? If you've never scaled a company, how do you know how to do it? If you've never reinvented yourself, how do you know how to do it? Right? So the identity of a failure is limiting. It's so damning. People completely stop what they're doing when they identify with being a failure. You are not a failure. You were there when the failure occurred. They're two different things. They're separate. We're not trained to think like this. And so we buy into this idea that I'm the problem. And feel that. When you say that, I'm a failure, feel that. That doesn't feel good. Are you motivated to take action? Are you motivated to go and learn? Are you motivated to go and tear down the place and reconstruct your mindset? No, you're not. What do you want to do? You want to go into the corner and lick your wounds. And then you share your story with other people who have failed. And now you've got a Facebook group called The Failures, right? And what do? You meet every week and talk about how you failed because it feels good. No one wants to be the lone failure. Better to be a group of failures. And so the identity is really important. You are not a failure. You just haven't figured out how to do X. This is really, really important to get these distinctions. Time right now as a creative is dedicated to moving fast. And we can't be thinking about ourselves like that and moving fast. The two things do not work together. When you think about what it is that you're doing, there must have been a point in your career, in your life, when you thought, I'm not going to take risks anymore. Right? You equated risks with danger. Right? You equated risks with failing, with making mistakes. Right? And so again, when I was going to leave my business, the fear that was almost crippling for 2 years. It took me 2.5 years to get up the courage to leave the business that I'd put 14 years into. The fear that I was making a mistake, the fear that I couldn't uh, reinvent myself. I didn't even know what it was back then. It was like I couldn't figure out how to get to wherever I was going to get to. Didn't even have a clear idea, but there was a fear. And the biggest risk of all was taking myself out of the security of the environment because the people there I built the business with, the money that I was earning on a regular basis, the security of the group, and the security of the scene, the security of the brand that I built. You know, Crust as a DJ producer who was in the scene. You know, the biggest risk was moving away from that. And of course, my mind's in overdrive, trying to survive, trying to think about what is it that I need to do so that I can keep this going. Even though in my mind, I know that it's not really working for me anymore. And so, how did I know? My energy had dropped, my motivation was waning, my love for it was almost depleted. I was exhausted, I was tired, I wasn't enjoying it, I was just showing up to get paid. I was not making the music that I wanted to make. I wasn't even spending quality time in the studio. And I was waking up dreading the day. Like those were signs that there was something wrong. Those were signs that the career path that I was chosen was drying up. something needed to change, right? Something was off, right? Something was off. And so in that moment, in that environment, leaving that to go and do something that was not clear, that didn't present itself to me, that I couldn't understand, because I didn't understand why I was feeling this way, because I'd been pursuing a career from the age of 14 that I finally created, and now it wasn't fulfilling. And so the idea that if I leave, it's going to work out was the biggest risk. But here, this, that wasn't the biggest risk. The biggest risk was doing nothing. The biggest risk was thinking that if I kept on doing what I was doing, I would be okay. That was the biggest risk. And so if you're a creator out there and you're feeling like it's time to change, like it's time to change, but you're asking yourself, how am I going to survive? How am I going to make a living? What do people my age do? Right? Remember the age, the number one. That's the biggest one that keeps people pedaling on the bicycle. That's on. You seen those bicycles that are on those like the exercise bike? You feel like you're moving, but you're not actually making progress. Right? You just pedal faster. You're on that bike thinking, if I just keep moving, if I just keep pedaling, I'll be making progress. But you're not. Nothing's really changing. And in your mind, you think, it's a risk. If I leave this, where will I go? Where will I end up? And I will agree, it is a risk. If you just go and you don't have a plan, that is a risk. If you stay and you don't have a plan, or your plan is to stay and keep doing the same thing, hoping that eventually it's going to work when you've exhausted it, which is the definition of madness, then yes, it's not going to be pretty. But you have an opportunity to do something different. You have an opportunity to think differently. You have an opportunity to use your skill set as a creator and shift into entrepreneurship, shift into understanding how your thinking creates value. Who you are is worth more as an entrepreneur, has value as an entrepreneur. And the future that we all dread is actually fertile ground that hasn't been exploited yet. And when you think about it like that, what occurs? What's changing? Remember, obstacles are opportunities. Like, they're doorways. We have just been taught and programmed to see them as closed loops, as problems, as hard no's. And the reality of this opportunity that we're seeing right now is that when you see obstacles as opportunities, you start to think differently, because everything starts with language, what we say, and how we identify with our language, with what's going on out there. And that gives us the clues and the energy for us to take the next step. If we're continually seeing problems, if we're continually identifying that I am X, you'll have low motivation, you'll have low creativity, and you won't be able to see opportunity in the obstacle. So we need to change our language first and foremost and ask a different question. How can I benefit from this obstacle? How can I use creativity to solve this problem? The better question we ask, the better the solution will be. You know, when you think about the the hidden costs of taking the risk, you know, what comes to mind? You know, what is for you, what is for you, what is the thing that you are holding back from in this situation? You know, why are you holding it back? What would you do if nobody was watching? Right? This is like a let's have a thought experiment. Right? We know what the problem is, and there are these assumptions that come with it. There's this ideology, this psychology, you know. The risk, really, what is the risk? What really is the risk when you think about it? You know, a lot of it is the assumptions. A lot of it is the perceived idea of how you're going to appear, right? Because failing in private, right? Work with me, guys. Failing in private is not the same as failing in public, is it? Right? You can be in your environment by yourself. You can experiment. So I'm in my studio, so I'm pointing at my equipment. You can experiment and you can fail 1,000 times when no one's watching. And you can walk out and you'll probably be all right. You know, I'll come back tomorrow. But I'm going to tell you a story. One of my biggest tracks, everybody knows, Warhead, one of my biggest tracks. I made the track in the night, 2 nights, and then on the weekend I played it out, and I was buzzing, I was excited, I knew I had something, and fourth tune in, I'm mixing, and then this tune comes in, this big dirty bass line, and it starts to play, and all of a sudden I could see people dancing, and I think, yeah, this is it, first, this tune's gonna drop, everyone's gonna love it, and it like burst, the bass line came in, and the boom 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 that drops, and everybody stopped dancing, and I looked around, and I was like, what is happening? Why aren't they dancing? Why don't they get this track? And I could see them slowly but surely. Everybody just stopped dancing. Everyone's just sort of like, I could just see this look on their face. What are you playing, dude? Like, and I was crushed. You know, I was so crushed that it was like, whoa. A couple of nights ago, I'm raving in my studio. I got the headphones on. I'm raving, I'm loving it. I'm thinking this tune's gonna boss up the weekend. And at the complete opposite. And it was that way for almost a year. Now, many people know this story, a lot of people don't. But for almost 12 months, Warhead, my biggest tune, is hard to imagine, I know, for some people, but that tune was clearing dance floors. Every week I played it. Every week it would do the same thing. It was so frustrating. And that was hard to deal with. You can imagine bruised ego, everyone in the dance looking at you like you're bringing my buzz down, you're spoiling the dance, you're playing that ridiculous, funny bassline song, and it's ruining my time, right? And, it hurt. It really, really hurt for a while. And I'm not going to lie, it definitely dented my ego, my pride. And it, you know, if I was a certain type of person, it could have completely ended my career. But fortunately, it didn't. I soldiered through. The idea that you cannot survive a failure, the risk, isn't actually true. Right? I'll tell you another story. I was in Africa earlier this year for 10 days with a project called Neura, and it was amazing. While we were there, I started to train. I haven't trained for almost 2 years, and we trained every day, and it completely took me out every day. I was so unfit. But while I came back, I started running, and I would get up at 6 in the morning and I would run to the park and I would do laps of this park. The thing that I learned from all of that was the discipline of being consistent. Now, running for me is quite a challenge because I'm not good at it, basically. But I find it quite challenging because you get to a point and the self talk kicks in, but you have to distinguish that self talk and what it's actually saying. And this taught me a valuable lesson. Am I willing to go through this self talk to see what's on the other side? And I would be running and I would feel this self talk, and the self talk would say, your body's hurting. And the mind would say, oh, you need to stop. You need to catch your breath. You're going to da da da. And all this chatter would go on. This sound familiar? You might be have this chatter when you're doing a project or you feel yourself, having to take a risk. There's all this chatter. Noise, 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 chatter, chatter, chatter. What do you do? Do you give in to it or do you push through it? Right? And so understand, what do you do? What would you do if no one was watching? Right? It's the same thing. You can answer that question, you will see what's on the other side. Because the majority of times when we stop, we don't believe we can actually accomplish the thing, we hold back. But we haven't tried enough. We haven't put that much energy into it. We get the chatter. The chatter makes us believe that I'm a failure. I failed at this last time, which is an action. The action you're doing now reinforces the failing. Right? If we don't take action, we if we don't take action, we reinforce the action we took before. Distinctions, right? Specificity. So what we need to understand is the self-talk isn't telling you not to do it. The patterns and the habits and the beliefs that come up aren't telling you not to do it. So when I was running and I was feeling those feelings and those thoughts, they weren't telling me you can't do it. They were just reminding me of a challenge that I needed to overcome. There's a big difference. And so the distinction that we should derive from this is the fear is not an indication that you can't do it. The risk is not an indication that you're going to fail. They're just feelings and emotions. Right? These are really interesting distinctions to really grasp, because it's important to really grasp this, because as you're building this new version of yourself, you are going to come up against old patterns, old ways of thinking. They're just stubborn patterns. They're just stubborn loops that you've been using for years. And they're just like anything, just like a pathway that you walk to school or walk to work. This becomes a habit. And you probably walk along that pathway, that way to work every day, to the point where you could probably do it with your eyes closed. Why? Because you just know it. It's familiar. It's safe. And so when you feel those emotions, you feel those feelings, that's what you're feeling. You're feeling the familiarity of safety. But it's also the illusion of safety. Right? It's also the illusion of safety, because the biggest risk is staying there thinking that it's always going to be like that. And as we said in the beginning, it's not always like that. Change and reinvention is required to prosper in this new economy. And just as a preface, we are entering a new phase. We're entering a new age. If you just follow the signs and the signals and you watch the patterns, there's a certain pattern that we're in at the moment. It's a very particular one. It's different from most, but it's the pattern of disruption, of of great economic change. But the distinction between this one and ones before is speed. We are entering a rapid era of speed, of change that is accompanied by speed. And so, how do we know? We can see companies now. This is one way to look at it. You can see companies now that are starting and they're going from zero to something like 100 million in 12 months. That used to take companies, 5 to 10 years with maybe 50 to 500 person teams. Now that's being done by like, less than 5 people with technology. The cost has come down, the manpower has shrunk, and the results are almost astronomical. This is happening today, right now. You can just go online and do some research. We're seeing the technology boom. I'm talking to you now on a iPhone. iPhones and this type of technology is proliferated across the globe, and it's making connectivity faster, cheaper. And now we have the AI arms race that's now equipping us with technology we couldn't imagine 5 years ago. And just last night, I was experimenting with Claude Design, Claude Code, or Claude Design. It, I'm speechless. I haven't got any words for it at the moment. It is crazy. And so, this type of advancement, we are not being able to keep up with. And so, the change that's required is understanding that we're moving into a new era that we now need to be prepared for. So, what's the difference between giving up and growing up? You're giving up when it becomes difficult or challenging. You're growing up when you realize that it's time to learn new skills, right? The problems that you attack and you go through, the obstacles that you attack and you go through, are the tools that you need to learn, and we could say grow, right? You have to grow through them. You cannot circumvent some of these obstacles and think you're going to get to the whatever the next level of your career or your life is. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. My partner and myself, we started a CBD oil company called Amalife CBD oil. When we started it, we understood a little bit about e-commerce, not lots. We bootstrapped the whole thing, and every day we were making mistakes. We were getting doors slammed. It was an exhilarating ride for the first 5 years. What I learned from that is you need to be in the business and learning by making all those mistakes, because what that taught us was every time a mistake happened and we fixed it, we created more resilience. We created more, uh, more confidence in what we were doing. And what I see a lot of people trying to do, they try to go from 0 to 100 in 2 or 3 weeks, and they try and think that they can cut out a lot of the early learning stuff because they want to do it fast. But the problem is, 3, 4 years down the line, when they start to have real problems, it's okay to have a £50 problem and not solve it. You don't want to have a 5 grand problem and not solve it. And so, all of the lessons that you need to learn in the beginning are teaching you how to solve the problems along the way. So it helps you build the confidence along the way. It gives you the toolkit along the way. Not only that, it teaches you a framework to start thinking about solving problems in real time where there are real consequences, right? And so the 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 learning that needs to be accomplished teaches you in a step-by-step manner the system that you need to build. And so this is what people are missing. And let's go back again to the very first part of this conversation, reinvention. Reinvention's a system. And this is what people have completely missed. They just try and either not do the work or they try and copy other people who are doing the work. But you're copying people who may have a system or they may not. But how do you know what they're doing works? Why are you copying them? Because it looks like it's working. Because you don't have a system. Because you haven't thought it through. And so while you see people who build slowly over time, make mistakes over time, take their time, doing one thing after another, what they're actually doing is they're learning a system. Because to build a big business requires solid foundations. And some of the foundations, at least 80% of them, are psychological. They're mental frameworks, their behaviors and their patterns. When you see people who are excellent at their role, they are excellent at building mental models. They're excellent at managing their mind. They're excellent at the psychological acrobatics that need to be performed on a day-to-day basis. Staying calm, visualizing, meditating, using mental models, thinking deeply, moving quickly. You will start to see if you pay attention to success, because success leaves clues. If you start paying attention to success, you start to see the people in the 1%, they think totally different from everybody else. And you might think to yourself, oh, that looks like they're just doing X, Y, Z. And look and check out what I just said. It looks like they're doing X, Y, Z. Yeah, it looks like that. But remember, excellence makes it look simple. When you saw Kobe Bryant weaving through people and then doing a three-pointer, it makes it look easy. When you see Lewis Hamilton, the the greatest racing driver of all time, winning again, he makes it look easy. But we don't see the hours and the hours and the hours of practice. We don't see Kobe get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go to the gym and practice for 4 hours before everyone else comes, and then he'll practice for another 4 hours. You don't see Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian, train every day. Christmas Day as well. 10, 15 years of training every single day, never missing a day. And you can see how that correlates to the results. Look at your actions. Look at the way you're thinking. And then how does that correlate with your results? You know, when you think about the difficulties and the challenges and the point when you give up, that's a pattern, that's a habit. And you look at where you are in your life and you say, it never works for me, or I never get X, or whatever the language you're using to describe the situation you're in. Notice the psychology, the beliefs, the patterns, and the habits that stop you from pushing through. Remember, fear is not an indication that you can't go forward. No doesn't mean you can't go forward. Your beliefs aren't telling you you can't go through them, right? They're just there. It's up for you to be up for the challenge, to be able to go through those feelings and those emotions and see where they take you. Like that is your challenge, you know? So what would let's do another thought experiment. So what would consistency in this endeavor look like to you? What would consistent income look like for you after taking these new steps? What would a new pathway in life look like when you took this new step? What is the future looking like now you've taken this new step? You know, what does that do? What does that bring? What does that feel like? Is there like, oh, like that sort of relief. I did it. I took the action. I believed in myself. There was an inkling of idea that helped me change. I noticed an opportunity and I took it. Now, what changes for you? What's different? Where does the power return? For me, when I eventually left Full Cycle, when I left Jungle, for about 6 or 7 months, it was a lot of sitting down and reviewing what happened, where where I'd thought I'd gone wrong, you know, replaying all of these scenarios, meetings, arguments, business decisions, things that had gone well, I thought, tracks that had worked, tracks that hadn't worked, opportunities that I'd taken, opportunities that I didn't take. I went over and over and I tried to understand why I was feeling this way. And then one day, I just had this kind of epiphany, it couldn't have happened any other way. Right? Where I'd come from, how I'd lived my life, what I'd learned, how I grew into a producer, a DJ, it couldn't have happened any other way, what I'd experienced. And I had to make peace with that. That was quite a challenge, but it eventually led to me releasing a lot of what I was holding on to that was slowing me down. Because the truth was, I wasn't that guy anymore. I wasn't just the DJ. I wasn't just the producer. I wasn't just the label owner. I was becoming something else. I just couldn't see it because the picture wasn't fully formed yet. I was shifting into my next phase of my journey, but I was resisting it because I couldn't see it. I needed evidence. I needed clarity. I needed certainty. But the longer I waited, the worse it got until I had to go. And when I went, it was the space that allowed me to blossom, to grow. Was I giving something up or was I growing? Right? I was doing both. But I didn't give up on myself. I betted on myself. I knew enough to know that I would be okay to a degree. I had skills, I had mindset, I had belief, I had patterns. I had 15 years in the business. I knew enough to know, a year or two, something was going to happen. 7, 8 months later, it was started to happen. I started to slow down. I started to think differently. I started to review. I started to get healthy again, taking, sleep. Creativity started to rise again. Motivation started to rise again. And then an idea came to me. And it was an idea based on where I was touring and DJing. People kept asking me, how did you become a DJ? How did you become a producer? How did you start a label? And I just remembered it out of the blue. And I said to myself, that's it. I'm going to figure out how I became a DJ. I'm going to figure out how I became a label owner. I'm going to figure out how I became a producer. And when I figure that out, I'm going to go around and teach people who are in a similar situation to me. And that's why I'm doing this today, because of that insight. And so 20 years later, I've been coaching, mentoring people all over the world. This brand, Adapt the Canvas, was created out of an obstacle, out of an area where I couldn't see what to do next, where I couldn't understand why I had to leave the music business and why I needed to reinvent myself. And you may be thinking to yourself, why have I been here listening to this guy talking about all this stuff? And you will find deep down it's because you're ready for your reinvention. So it doesn't matter what time you get this message, it's timely. We're all going through it at our different pace. We're all going through this at a different time. But reinvention comes to us all. And if you're over 40, this message is designed for you to hear and to understand that you're not too old. You know, there are there are more doors opening for you than you could ever imagine. You've got a skill set, you've got patterns, you've got habits, you've got abilities that give you the advantage, not the disadvantage. You have the advantage. You have a set of skills that are going to allow you to prosper in the next 10 years. You just need to tap into them. You just need to figure out what those skills are and how to leverage them for your own good. So I'm here to help you figure that out. And if you want to have a conversation, leave a message in the chat, message me on here. You can reach me on adaptivek@gmail.com. You can book a call. There's going to be a link in either in the chat or on my profile. Book a call with me. Let's have an expansion session where I can help you get clarity on what your next steps are, help you build that vision, help you take advantage of all your skill sets, and help you grow into something new and wonderful. This is Adapt the Canvas, Volume 3. And I will see you next week for another session. Have a great week.